Hello, and everyone. Welcome to our Freshwater Stewardship Community webinar for today on this special day, which is Giving Tuesday. We're very excited to have you here today for our presentation with our own Chantal Lefevre, who is our Natural Edge Regional Coordinator. My name is Monica Seidel. I'm the Communications and Fundraising Manager with Watersheds Canada. And we also have Nicole Dubé, who is our Freshwater Health Coordinator, in the chat today. So she'll be helping everyone out with the tech problems that you may or may not have. Today's session is being recorded, so if you have to leave at any point, no problem there. We'll be sending a recording to everyone who is registered for today's event. For those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, we are Watersheds Canada, a national nonprofit and charitable organization that is headquartered in Perth, Ontario, which is just about an hour outside of Ottawa. Our focus is in delivering freshwater stewardship programming that focuses on protecting the health of our lakes, rivers, and shorelands. And of course, we will be talking about that more in just a bit with Chantal's presentation. We deliver a number of programs. I won't go into too much detail for the Natural Edge, since that's obviously Chantal's specialty, but we have other programs such as our Love Your Lake program, which is a shoreland assessment program delivered in partnership with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, which is pictured in the bottom left. We have our fish habitat restoration program, which actually Chantal will be talking a bit about as well. And so this is working with different community groups and shoreline property owners to restore their in-water and shoreland habitat to protect fish species in their lake. And we also have different outreach programming, like our nature discovery programming for children, especially working with waterfront associations, public libraries, and schools to help get families out in nature. We have other programs that are not pictured on this slide. So if you are interested in learning about our organization as a whole and also the different programs we deliver and how you might be able to get involved, you can visit watersheds.ca/our-work. At least where I'm based right now, we're starting to get the snow, which always gets me in the holiday mood. So if you are like me and you are starting to think about your holiday shopping, we would encourage you to think about having maybe possibly some Canadian artwork as some of your gifts that also will benefit those actual species. So Watersheds Canada has a symbolic adoption program, which features Canadian artists who have contributed their different artwork, and all of the proceeds from these adoptions go to our freshwater stewardship programming. So you can adopt different species, different types of habitat, lakes as a whole. There are lots of different options. Each adoption comes with a blank honor card to give as a gift, as well as a 5x7 postcard featuring that artwork and a little bit of an artist biography on the back. So if you are interested in making any of these symbolic adoptions, you can do so at watersheds.ca/gifts. And all of our adoptions are eligible for Canadian charitable tax receipts. And today, as probably lots of you already know, you would have likely gotten a lot of emails about Giving Tuesday, and one this morning from our own Executive Director, Robert Pye, about Giving Tuesday. So this is a global generosity movement that is about giving back to your community. And so one way that you're able to do that, obviously, is through financial contributions. So Watersheds Canada, as a registered charity, depends on the generosity from individual supporters, as well as business supporters and family foundations and granting organizations to deliver the work that we do. And this Giving Tuesday, we have an opportunity with Maitland Tower, which is a site down by the St. Lawrence River in Ontario, and they are matching all new monthly donations that are made this Giving Tuesday. And so if you are in a position to help support freshwater programming going into 2024, we would encourage you to take advantage of that matching opportunity, and you can do so by visiting watersheds.ca/donate. You can also, if you're already on our mailing list, answer the email that Robert sent you, and there's some information in there to make a secure donation as well. And finally, a little bit of introduction about the Freshwater Stewardship Community, which is the program that we are all in a digital space for today for the next hour or so. The Freshwater Stewardship Community was launched in 2021 as a result of the pandemic, and Watersheds Canada looking to keep connecting with community groups and provide opportunities for learning and also program delivery so that people could continue to take action in their area, even with a bit of a different format going on. So we were able to launch this community, which has been a huge blessing. We've been able to reach so many groups across Canada, so many new partnerships, and also host some fantastic speakers. So far, we have had 41 webinars, and almost all of those webinars have accompanying handouts, which summarize what was said in the presentation, but then also the different action steps that individuals and community groups can take to address that specific issue. So if you are newer to the freshwater stewardship community, everything is archived on our website. So the site that you would have gone to register for today's session, if you just scroll down the page a little bit, you will find all of those webinars and handouts, and those are free to share as widely as you would like. And we want to help equip as many people and groups as possible to help protect their freshwater. So you can find all of those resources at watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship. And I would like to take a moment to thank our funders for the freshwater stewardship community this year, which include the Echo Foundation, the SM Blair Family Foundation, and the Peterborough KM Hunter Charitable Foundation. As I mentioned, almost all of these webinars come with a handout. So this is one from when we just did a few weeks ago. And so we will be sending a handout for today's session early next week, along with the recording, and it will outline different action steps that you can take specifically around nature-based solutions and protecting freshwater health. Our last webinar for 2023 will be taking place on Wednesday, December 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And this will be looking at using paleolimnology to reveal the impact of climate change, especially around algal blooms. And so we would encourage you to register for that session. It will be recorded, so if you can't attend the live time slot, you can still register for the session, and we will send you the recording and the information handout after the session. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Chantal Lefevre is an accomplished professional who earned an advanced diploma in environmental technology from Fleming College, followed by a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from Trent University. She successfully concluded her formal educational pursuits in 2020. She has worked with various levels of government, conservation authorities, and the private environmental sector throughout her professional journey. Ultimately, she has found her niche within the environmental nonprofit sector, and she is driven by a commitment to community betterment. Chantal currently assumes the role of regional coordinator with the Natural Edge program in Watersheds Canada. And in this role, she leverages the Natural Edge app and other resources to engage waterfront property owners, facilitating the restoration of shorelands utilizing native plants. This initiative aims to bolster the resilience of their ecosystems against the effects of climate change while safeguarding the integrity of freshwater ecosystems. So this is a perfect opportunity for Chantal to share all of her knowledge. There will be a Q&A at the end of today's session. So if you have questions as Chantal is going, I encourage you to pop those in the chat, and then her and I will be going through those, as many of those as we're able to, live in today's session. And I know Chantal will be putting her contact information on the last slide of her presentation. So if you come up with any questions for her, she is always ready and eager to talk about native plants. And I know this is her passion, so she'd be very happy to talk with you about specific issues you're having on your property or any ideas you have after today's session. So with that, Chantal, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Monica. So I'll just share my screen to get the my presentation up. Okay, so thank you for the lovely introduction. You kind of covered exactly who I am. And today I'll be talking about restoring the river life one shoreline at a time, and how that impacts of climate change have to do with that. So I'll just go over a rough overview of some global impacts of climate change, the biggest one being warming temperatures and changing weathering patterns that will result in more frequent spring floods and summer droughts, more severe storms, and decreased water quality and quantity. Because of some of these changes to our climate, we'll have more frequent wildfires. Love plants. I always talk about wildflowers instead. But wildfires will be more intense. Food scarcity and community displacement may become more common. There'll be a loss of the biodiversity and an increased prevalence of pests such as ticks and other insect-borne diseases may become more common as these pests are more prevalent. So those are kind of the global impacts that we're looking at, but what are they on our aquatic systems specifically, especially related to our Canadian aquatic systems? So frequent flooding and associated erosion. So this is from Lake Michigan, a big flooding event that happened in 2019. So there was a lot of destruction happening from that flooding event, which then had erosion, extreme erosion happening on this very sandy shoreline, which resulted in, this person's home and many others being destroyed from that flooding event. So with the climate change impacts, these things are going to be becoming more common, but through nature-based solutions and other solutions, we can be more resilient against these erosion impacts. There'll be a change in habitat range and spawning seasons for wildlife, especially for fish in our aquatic systems. So on the image on the left, you can see what temperature ranges certain fish prefer to live in and prefer to breed in as well. So we have some fish like, the pumpkin seed and the bluegill sunfish that can handle those really warm temperatures. When we get down to colder temperatures, for like our yellow perch and our rock bass, and especially our walleye, those more game fish that are better for fishing recreationally, eating, and that sort of thing. They need those kind of cooler temperatures, and so as our air temperature increases, our water temperature is going to increase, thus limiting the breeding capacity of some of these fish and where they can live. And perhaps their habitat may change a bit as they're going to have to go deeper into the water to get those cooler temperatures. So there's a lot of different impacts coming from that is still currently being researched as well. So a decrease in water quality then is going to then contribute to an increase of algae blooms. So as water temperatures increase, that algae has a better time of living. So it can produce faster and create these negative algae blooms. So when we have a big algae bloom, it can cause a fish kill in the end. If it's too large of an algae bloom, once that algae eventually ends up dying, it's then going to suck up all that extra oxygen as it's being decomposed, which lowers the dissolved oxygen in the lake, which then can result in a fish kill because those fish need oxygen to breathe, obviously. So that could have a huge negative impact, but it also could have smaller negative impacts, including recreational, like not being able to swim off the dock on your cottage, perhaps, or just having less light penetrating the lake down to the plants down below that are being fed on by turtles or has habitat for fish. So lots of different impacts when it comes to algae blooms. And that algae blooms are contributed through warmer water temperatures as well as worse water quality. So when we have a lot of runoff from those more frequent storms from climate change, that carries on like extra nutrients that algae can also live off of, thus creating more algae blooms as well. So a lot of things contributing to water quality and algae blooms, but a lot of nature-based solutions are the best for water quality and algae blooms as they suck up those extra nutrients and have a contributing role to the general ecosystem. The next one will be changes in ice dynamics, which I already certainly see myself as I live very close to Lake Ontario. And I can tell like past years, there has not been the ice that there has been historically in this area. This is something that's being researched a lot. As you can see, there's an article there just from March 2023, as researchers are trying to really understand what implications that this less ice will do for mainly our Great Lake systems, as they're really unique, large lake bodies. That ice has a lot of role to play, but also on our smaller inland lakes, there'll be a lot of impacts from less ice as well. So some of those negative impacts include increased evaporation rates, meaning that our water levels will be could be potentially lower in the springtime just because there was no ice stopping that evaporation all throughout winter. Loss of shoreline protection. So in some areas, ice can be damaging to your shoreline, but in other aspects, it can protect it against winter storms. So that's more of an impact on our Great Lakes, is where we have those big wave action on the Great Lakes, where that ice limits that wave action in the wintertime. Whereas if we don't have that ice, we're going to still have that extreme wave action during those winter storms. And again, that increased algae production because of the warmer temperatures, because of less ice over the winter, the water's going to be warmer, and that the sunlight can get through to the water year round instead of being protected by that ice level. So that algae productivity never really decreases throughout the winter if we don't have that ice cover. Some of the positives, which is unique when talking about climate change aspects, is that there's going to be increased potential for overwinter survival. So like there's fish have a better time living off because of the less ice, so they'll have a higher survival rate. There'll be warmer temperatures in the water, so fish productivity will be increased. An interesting one is that there'll be a smaller annual contaminant pulse or toxic shock. So during the winter, all those kind of airborne contaminants land on ice and get packed into the snow level and in the ice. And then those are, once the ice starts to melt, those are released into the actual water body, causing that shock, that initial like all these contaminants at once. So if we don't have that ice cover, those contaminants are still entering a water body, but at a much slower rate. So there's not going to be that initial shock to the animals living in that water body. So nature-based solutions. I'm a little biased opinion, but I think they're a very effective way of becoming a more resilient climate change, and that's been confirmed over scientists that concur that it is a very important and effective way to improve climate resiliency, especially on our shorelands and aquatic systems, as they have a huge role to play in how the ecosystem works and works with each other on that shoreland between terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Um, so one of those nature-based solutions includes, vegetated riparian zones and keeping that shoreline natural as possible, as they have many impacts that I'll be going into later in this presentation. So on the right, you can see a picture of a restoration of a shoreland that has been all grass historically, as that was the kind of norm when these cottages were put into place. But through the science and education and actually directly seeing impacts, mindsets are changing, and nature-based solutions have become a really common and effective way at becoming more resilient to climate change. So some of those impacts of having a vegetated shoreland as a nature-based solution to climate resiliency includes buffering those harmful pollutants that will be running off. So I mentioned more increased storm activity and having more storms and storms that are much more stronger, and that would increase the amount of runoff that would be coming off of our lake, as the soil can only take so much water at once. So we have like a heavy rainfall and it's too much for the soil to take. That's going to create that runoff into our aquatic systems. And that's when that excess water picks up all those contaminants, such as extra nutrients, road salt that's on the road coming down, perhaps any pesticides or herbicides that are on agricultural land, that can all then freely run off into our aquatic systems, where then they build up and create more of a harmful effect. They provide a great food and shelter for wildlife, including many species at risk, as that's kind of the transition zone between aquatic and terrestrial life, whereas many species kind of rely on that transition, and mostly, turtles and amphibians and a lot of birds rely on that transition zone, as they get benefits from both of them. So when you have a healthy vegetated shoreland, those species can then thrive and benefit off of, the healthy terrestrial zone you just created, as well as that aquatic zone. They also can be very beautiful. Many people move to cottages and spend summers up at the cottages or their permanent homes on lakefront property because of the beauty of the area. And that brings a lot of economic value to many municipalities, as these are, you think of the Muskokas, and that's where a lot of their economic and tourist money comes from. So keeping that beauty helps the economic as well as helping the aquatic systems be healthy. Another huge one that we work with a lot of people is to mitigate erosion. So historically, everything has been gone down to grass right to the shoreline, and those grass, especially when grass is maintained as a lawn, has a very short root systems, only maybe 3 to 5 inches of root systems. And then those root systems get really heavily tangled and the grass dies off, but the roots are there and it kind of becomes this thick mat that I describe as a kind of creates a slip and slide for water to run off and just carry anything with it. So it doesn't buffer any of those contaminants and doesn't hold your soil together as you're having to deal with runoff from the land, but also wave action from the water. So it doesn't help hold that soil together with those very shallow, densely little root systems. They may help on the surface, but down below there is no support there. So when you have a variety of shrubs and trees and native grasses as well that are not maintained into a lawn, those root systems go a lot deeper and can hold those soil particles together. So especially when it comes to mitigating erosion, having a mixture of all that can be very helpful, as those trees have large root systems that can hold together mass quantities of soil. And then when you mix in those grasses, those sedges and shrubs that have different root systems that are more like webby and net-like, they can hold together those smaller sections of soil, creating a very good uh, net-like structure of roots underneath that are deep into the soil that can help really hold that soil together against wave action and flooding and severe runoff that is becoming more prevalent with the climate change. Um, and then they also, like I've mentioned, a lot of protecting freshwater ecosystems against impacts of climate change. They all kind of go together. You know, having a healthy ecosystem is going to help at the end protect against the impacts of climate change. So if the ecosystem's healthy, it's going to be more resilient as it can mitigate what these effects may be. And those effects may be different on every single lake, every different province. So having that healthy, dynamic ecosystem is what's key to being resilient against climate change. So one of the options that we have here at Watersheds Canada helped to build that resiliency is our guide to building resilient shorelands. It's based on science and has many different options and tools available to make your property more resilient to the impacts of climate change. A big one being erosion, because we're going to see that a lot more with increased storms and runoff and flooding events. So one of the nature-based solutions there is vegetated riprap. So a native shoreline can be planted on any type of shoreline when there's grass, but if there's riprap in place, which is just small kind of river stone rock that's been placed there, either current, like right now it could be happening, or in the past, planting within that helps increase that erosion, uh, like erosion control. You can also manage that runoff. So and that would be protecting against erosion coming from the water and the runoff side, but runoff is also a major thing, especially with stormwater. So there's some options there, including like permeable driveway to help that soil soak up as much water as possible before it runs off into our aquatic systems. And the last one being monitoring for invasive species, as our native species are going to be more resilient to the impacts of climate change compared to our invasive species that kind of push out those native ones. That can be plants, that's animals, and aquatic plants as well. So just keeping an eye on that kind of thing and make your property very healthy. Our next option is our guide to preparing our shoreline naturalization planting plan. So this guide walks you through step by step, very clearly, and in a way that we run our restoration program as well, by drawing out your planting area, assessing plant conditions, and then choosing appropriate native plants to then put on your property to make it more resilient. So this walks you all the way through it and what can be added, and you can see on the picture there about where you can map it out and And if you have plants currently there, that's great, but adding in, making it more resilient and creating that buffer zone. So it's a great tool to use if you're wanting to do a restoration in yourself. But there are local planting programs available as well, including, Watersheds Canada's Natural Edge program, which I'll be going into more detail. Some local conservation authorities in Ontario also have planting programs. And there's also municipalities sometimes support these planting programs as well. So there are options there if you're looking into this nature-based solution of vegetated shorelands. So our program works to empower landowners, municipalities, and organizations to get them started on shoreland restoration. So using technology and education to help restore and make their properties more resilient to climate change. So we work with many partners across the country. So our program might be in your area. It's not just in Ontario. So it's all across the country, working with different organizations, getting them the tools they need to restore shorelines. So how does the Natural Edge program work for landowners? So the delivery partners such as ourselves actually go out to your site specifically to take photos and notes and measurements and to get an understanding of the ecosystem on your shoreland. As every lake can differ, every province is different. So you need to know like soil types and moisture levels is important. So we go out and we actually talk with you about your property. We then create a customized planting plan that works with the landowner to create the best plan that works for them, as we not acknowledge the fact that many people live on shoreland properties because they enjoy getting to the water, they enjoy having a dock and a boat to fish off and that sort of thing. So making a plan that works for them when they can still have the access points and the activity areas on their property, but all those amazing benefits of a natural shoreline as well. And the next step is the fun part, planting a shoreline with all these unique native species and with beautiful native species of flower shrubs and wildflowers, trees that are, in my opinion, um, not used enough in landscaping. And they have the greatest benefit to the ecosystem, including food for birds and that erosion control that I mentioned before, and habitat for a variety of different species. So those customized plans are created using the Natural Edge app, which to me just kind of feels like a little video game, but it's a great communication tool with landowners and other delivery partners to utilize this app to create these planting plans. So on the right, you can see a picture of a design planting plan with all the flowers and the trees and the shrubs all mapped out there. In the planting plan, you get it's linked to our native plant database. So this is a great tool for organizations and delivery partners that need that more education about what plants will work best there, as this native plant database recommends them that will work best. So you could be confident that the species planted there will survive and have a great benefit to that ecosystem. Another part of the plan you get is a description of each plant. So there's the beautiful Allegheny serviceberry and those stunning flowers of the black chokeberry, both common species that we use in our shoreline restoration. Because they have, especially the black chokeberry, have amazing root systems for erosion control, and they have a suckering capacity, so they spread out readily and can control that erosion and hold that soil together. But they also just get covered with berries every year and tons of flowers for our pollinators. So they're a really great species from many aspects, and that's why we use them a lot. And they're also an edible berry to us as well. So they're a really dynamic species that's used a lot. And you can see in the picture on the right, again, another just mapped out planting area with those soil types and moisture levels, and you can be confident that they're the right species to be used in that area for that nature-based restoration. Other resources that come with a restoration and are also available at any time for free on our website is our native plant care guide, as well as a wildflower garden guide, which is a very popular one, especially if you don't have a shoreland. That one helps you create a wildflower garden for our pollinators using all native species. And it's really important to use native species whenever possible, as they have those connections with our pollinators and our other insects that have been dwindling and struggling with the impacts of climate change already. So when we kind of provides a home for them when they need it most. And that guide can help you create that wildflower garden that will also look stunning with many beautiful species, such as the black-eyed Susan pictured there. And then our shoreline habitat creation manual then is another thing that can talk you through creating that habitat for whatever species you want to get more prevalent on your property. That could be turtles or the crane pictured there as well. I mentioned the native plant database, so that is freely accessible as well. So if you're like me and just a little bit of a plant nerd and want to go learn about some native species and some of their benefits and where they live and that sort of thing, it's a great tool to use. It also is a great tool if you're using the guide to preparing a shoreline naturalization. This will help you pick out your plants that you want to use for the property. So as you can even see there with the alternate leaf dogwood, again, another beautiful flowering shrub that is not used a lot in our landscaping practices, but in our freshwater ecosystem is really important to use. So Watersheds Canada is taking action now, so we can get the tools and the native plants needed to restore your shoreland. So you can reach out to me. We're booking for 2024 for site visits, and we're expanding the program currently as well. So we have multiple organizations jumping on board with us. So there may be an opportunity to restore your shoreland in your area as well. So just reach out, and we can help you with whatever way possible. And my belief is, helping one frog, one tree, one fish at one shoreline at a time does make an impact. And I've had some people ask me questions about, that buffer zone's kind of small. It's only, so many plants. It's not like going to make a huge impact, but every shoreline matters and every action counts. And when you combine them all, and we just put together our numbers for the fall season, and we took one planting at a time, but in the end we ended up planting over 37,000 plants just this fall. So every action counts, and we encourage you to participate in the program or donate if you're potentially possible to do so, because it does make a big impact. You can find my email there, naturaledge@watersheds.ca. So if you have any questions or you want to participate in the program, or you just want to talk about plants or other nature-based solutions, please reach out, as I'm always available to chat and provide you any education resources needed for yourself or your organization to share with others, as there's a ton of great information out there. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Chantal. I'll get you to leave that slide deck up because we have a couple questions that have come through based on what you shared. But thank you so much for sharing all of those great resources. And like Chantal said, we're in growth mode with the Natural Edge program. So we're going to be in many different new communities across the country next year. So now is the time to connect with her and see how you might be able to restore your property. And even if we don't have a delivery partner in your area, Chantal is able to offer advice and different suggestions by email or phone. So I will point you always to Chantal if you have plant questions. She's here to help. And we do have a number of questions that are submitted through the Q&A, and I know some people are dropping them in the chat now. I will say that Nicole is going to pop in a short survey link in there. So if you're able to take a few minutes just to let us know how we did today, and also if you have suggestions for our 2024 Freshwater Stewardship Community Webinar Series, then now is the time to tell us, because we are planning out our series and reaching out to speakers. So we have a couple different ideas already based on the feedback we've received this year. But if you have something that your community is really struggling with or something that you're just interested in learning more about, please let us know. So I see Nicole's just put that in the chat. We'll also put the survey in the follow-up email. So without further ado, Chantal, we're going to get through some of the questions. So this first one is about a different type of landscapes. It's called dryland landscape. And so if you could just explain how this landowner might adopt nature-based solutions to protect the lakes in their area.
So it's a more drier lake area?
That's right.
Okay. So there are many species that still can handle fluctuating water levels, even if you are in a drier area. So with those increase of storms and severe weather events, those drier areas that have historically been dry could be getting those more flooding events. So picking species that could handle that, where there are many available that are really resilient to many different things. So I would encourage you to look into the native plant database, as you can literally filter out plants that can handle those dry conditions, but would still be effective nature-based solutions to controlling erosion and things like that, because they can handle those flooding events. So that's all described in our plant database. So even like you can see in the picture on the slide now, that's a fragrant sumac that is a pretty dynamic species that could handle occasional flooding, but also extreme drought. So there are many species available that can work for you.
Perfect. The next question is about success of the plants, making it from year to year. So do you have any strategies about helping restore your shoreland, but getting the plant survival to be as high as possible?
Yes. So that is somewhat discussed in our native plant care guide. So I would encourage you to download that and take a read through that. But also, we find the key is, especially for the first about 3 to 5 years, they do need some water, especially during those summer dry seasons. So that is a big thing to get on as a landowner and to try to be consistent is getting them some water. You can also see in the picture there that's called a hemp mat. So it's a material made out of hemp that we put around our shrubs, and that helps with that moisture retention and keeping any weeds back as well. So those tall native grasses, which are also beneficial, but they don't really help our plants in the beginning. So that's another option to use when trying to get that survival. And it's really important in the first about 3 years, and then once you get past that critical point, then that survival rate will be increased. But yeah, getting that water in and just keeping an eye on them, which is, one of my fun parts of the job is when I get to go back to a site and actually look at where the plants are and see how they're doing and see what's using them. Like maybe you'll see some insects on them, or perhaps a deer has nibbled on them, which can be good and bad for survival rates. So there's some other tools around that if you are having a lot of deer predation on your plants. So if you have questions about that, if that's a concern, you can reach out to me. There's a lot of different ways we can help with survival, but I would say the biggest one is just giving them some water those first years to get those roots to get out of that where they were planted and spread out and get deeper into the soil to get more water needed. And eventually they will be fine if the appropriate plants were chosen, that is.
Our next question is about water samples. So a shoreline property owner is interested in testing for algae. Do you have any places you could point them or information about how they could go about doing that?
Yeah, so it would depend on where you are located. And if it is specifically to algae, it's if you're looking at the blue-green algae, there are more sampling options for that. I know in my area, my health department, in combination with the MOE, has blue-green algae sampling available. If it is other types of algae, I'm not aware of any other programs about that, but it really depends on where you're located and what sampling options are out there for you.
Also, depending on where you are, a conservation authority might be a good place to help you, even if they aren't the people to do it with you, they might be able to point you into the direction of a lab or someone who can help you. There are often also researchers who they will know of that can maybe help you get started with some community science monitoring. So lots of different options there. Our next question is about farmland and buffer zones. So do you know of any strategies to have proper setbacks and buffer zones to protect lands from the drainage that happens over the farmland?
Yeah. In terms of how we at Watersheds Canada go about agricultural setbacks is, building those impacts with farmers is quite important, and describing why it's important to them as well. So that can be really effective, just having that open communication. There are some rules around it. They're pretty specific, especially in terms of if they're applying what certain types of fertilizers they're applying, if they're applying any pesticides. So they're pretty site specific, and that's all mandated through the Nutrient Management Act. So if you're interested in that, I would say look into that, and that's managed by the MOECC, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. That's what that legislation is through, but it is pretty site specific. So I would say if you're looking at it from a community standpoint, just talking with those farmers and explaining the benefits, and if restoration is an option. There's also funding available to farmers to plant these kind of setbacks. So if you're interested in learning more about that funding potential, I can provide you more information if you reach out to me as well.
Great. And I know some of the questions in the chat, some of our colleagues are answering them. So thank you, Chloe and Nicole. But if you could just go through this anyway, Chantal, for other groups, you mentioned that you have different delivery groups across the country. So if someone is interested in being a delivery group, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, if you're interested, that's fantastic, as we're always wanting to share our resources and, restore as many shorelands as possible. So you can reach out to me at naturaledge@watersheds.ca, and I can forward your information on to the Natural Edge manager, Chloe, who's in the chat, or you can reach out to her email at lejoie@watersheds.ca. And we'll get you an introductory meeting, and we can talk about what your organization can do and how we can partner, and yeah, we can start that conversation, and we always love learning about newer organizations and how we can help each other. As like I mentioned, every action counts, and we want to share resources as much as possible.
And we can put that information in the follow-up email. There's a current call for applications for new partners. We have some exciting funding for 2024. So we can put that announcement in Chantal's follow-up webinar email, so that if you know of a group or you are a representative with a group that might be interested in delivering the Natural Edge program in 2024, you can submit your interest through that. Our next question I will answer, if that's okay, Chantal. It's just someone who's wondering about multiple copies of the booklets that you mentioned. So that would come through me. So as Chantal mentioned, all of them are available for free download as PDFs. But if you prefer to have hard copies and give them out at an event, or maybe in a welcome package for a new property owner on your lake, you can give me an email. I think either Chloe or Nicole can put my email in the chat. It's just my last name at watersheds.ca. And the cost of the booklets is just the printing cost. So we can organize, depending on where you are, you might be able to pick it up from our office in Perth, or we can organize shipping with you. So just give me an email for that, and we can figure out a bulk order for those booklets. All right. Our next question would just be, and by the way, people are dropping some great information in the chat about different organizations or things that have worked for them. So I would encourage people to check out in there too. Nice to see some familiar names in there. Someone's just asking where the app is. So maybe you can explain that a bit further, Chantal, how the app is used and who gets to use it?
Yeah, so the app requires some kind of background work and login. So that is only available to our delivery partners. So if you're interested in that, like I said, reach out and we can have the introductory meeting. But yeah, it's only that one is the only resource that's only available to our delivery partners, as it does require some back end work and a login to our website and a bunch of other things. So that is it's a very good app, but it is a little complicated, needs some extra work. So just reach out and we can get you set up as a delivery partner if you're interested. But yeah, that one's only available to our delivery partners.
Our next question is about costs. So I know it's partner specific and site specific, but if you can maybe just explain what the general costs are when someone purchases one of those starter kits and how they can customize it based on their property or the finances that they have available for a kit.
Right. Yeah. So the initial site visit is included in the cost and is free and is included in the cost of the plants. So that's the first step. And then for ourselves, for our delivery area, Watersheds delivery area, it's for those you get 50 plants and then all the material, such as those hemp mats to create that survivability rate. That's all included in our kit, as well as those resources I mentioned earlier. So you get those 50 plants for just under $400, but that's just our area. So prices do change based on cost of plants in the delivery partners area, um, funding that has been supporting the program. So that can differ per delivery partner, or even for ourselves. It's been different throughout the years. So it just depends on what subsidized funding is working towards the customized planting plans and the restoration. So it can change. So right now it's about for those 50 plants that starts you off. It's at just under 400, but we can always include more plants on top of that as well. So if you have a bigger area, we can include those on top, and then those are just at the price we got them from the nursery, and we source them from a variety of nurseries. So it's an effective way to get a good diversity of plants, and then they're at a discounted price because we get them in bulk and that sort of thing. So and that will be changed per delivery partners as well. So it's very specific to the area and specific to how many plants you want as well. So that's all stuff that is discussed in during like the site visits and creating that customized plan. So it's specific to every property. So that would be, if you have any questions specific to your property, just reach out to me.
And as Chantal mentioned, for site visits, at least in our delivery area, those are free. So you get free, I think they're usually around an hour with Chantal or another member from the Natural Edge staff team. You're actively walking your property together, and so you're able to talk about these different things that you might be concerned about or areas that you want to focus your restoration on. So it's very hands-on, collaborative, making that restoration plan that Chantal had a few slides back. So email Chantal is going to be the answer for a lot of things today. We have a question here about a property that has sand, and I'm not sure if they mean that they have sandy soil or they have a sandy beach, but maybe you could they're wondering where to start with a shoreline restoration.
Right. Yes. So I would differ if it's a sandy beach or just sandy soil. Sandy soil is very susceptible to erosion, and for sandy soil, I recommend getting plants in as soon as possible, as they're just really susceptible to erosion because they just don't hold together very well. So where to get started is, if you're doing this yourself, access that shoreline naturalization planting guideline, and then utilize that and our native plant database, because you can just filter out all plants that can handle that sandy soil. And depending if your sandy soil is dry or very wet, then you can also filter it out for those plants as well. And then, especially with sandier soil, if you are experiencing erosion, kind of put more plants in that you think is needed, as you want it as densely planted as possible. with those species that can handle that sandy soil. And some of them love sandy soil. So I would say filter through and see what works best for you, and then trying to source those plants as well. Especially with sandy soil that's on the drier side, some of our native taller non-maintained grasses can be a good option, as they can handle those drier conditions if it's a dry sandy soil.
Great. And they did confirm in the chat it's sandy soil and not a sandy beach. So that's great.
Okay.
The next question is kind of the flip side of that. So someone's asking about riprap and how they might be able to integrate a nature-based solution when they didn't personally install the riprap, but they are looking to try and naturalize and soften the shoreline a bit more. So do you have any suggestions for that?
Yes. So planting within it is always our suggestion if possible. So that's not always possible, as the riprap could be too deep that the plants wouldn't be able to grow there effectively. So it kind of depends on how deep that riprap is. But if it's not deep enough that we can just you can kind of move a couple rocks away and find that soil underneath, and then dig in there and then plant a taller, very sturdy plant within there. A lot of times we use dogwood for vegetated shorelands, for vegetated riprap, sorry, as they're pretty hardy, and if a stem breaks off from moving rocks, then they can just bounce back very easily. So there's many different dogwoods that are effective in vegetated riprap. So that's kind of how we approach that, and it's specific, as we've been to some sites where the riprap is just too deep, you can't find any soil underneath, or the stems of the plants are going to be too crowded in with the rock, and then it's just not going to have a high survival rate. So it is very site specific. But if you can find that soil, definitely vegetate that riprap, as that extends the life of the riprap, and betters that erosion control as well.
Our next one is just asking if you can go back to the plant database slide.
Sure. This one here. So here on the side, you can see a couple of the filters on the left-hand side. So like if I was to be filtering these out, I would click on Ontario. And then if I was interested in some shrubs to plant on, you'd click on the shrubs. And then down below is where you'll get what kind of soil type you have, how moist it is throughout the year, and that sort of thing. So that's when you filter down the hundreds of plants on the database to ones that may work on your property. And then you can click on the alternate leaf dogwood, read a bit more about it. Maybe you have a lot of flooding year round on your property, as that's common on your lake, and a dogwood can handle that, and that will be described in the description of the plant as well. So you can filter them and then click on each plant, which has more description of how they look and their planting conditions, to really confirm if they'll work on your property. Or just learn about plants if you're like me and just like to learn about plants.
Everyone should learn about plants.
They're amazing.
The question is about the zone map. So I know you won't be able to show it, but can you just explain what the zone map is?
Yes. So each plant has different hardiness zones that they can survive in, as some can only handle those warmer climates that are, farther down south. And as we get farther up, it gets colder. So that zone map just delineates those hardiness zones for each plant. So you would just try to find where you are planting in that map zone, and then click on it, and that should show you what hardiness zone you're in. And then if that will then filter those plants that are available to that hardiness zone. So for me, I'm in zone 6A, but there's lots of plants that can handle zone 4 to like 8. So a lot of overlap. So, but it's important to know that you're not planting something that can't handle a Canadian winter because it's from south of the border, for instance. So that's what that map is there for. Another just option for filtering down plants that should help you determine plants that will work best in your area.
Our next question is about mites. They think that they have them in their shoreline water. Do you know what causes this and how they can manage them?
Yeah, so I guess it would depend on what type of mite. Mites are in most water bodies. pretty much everybody. They're a type of aquatic invertebrate. So they're basically just tiny little water spiders. Now they're not actually in the spider family, but that's kind of how they look. They have like 8 little eggs and are just like little specks kind of swimming through the water. Most of the time, from my knowledge, they don't have a negative impact unless they're really prevalent or maybe a species not native. I don't know much more about that, but from my perspective, and I've done some aquatic invertebrate sampling in the past, you'll find them quite often, and they're a food source to many small fish, as they're kind of like the smallest aquatic invertebrates. So I wouldn't say they're a bad thing from my knowledge of what was on your property right now. It could be different, but they're a quite common species.
I'm trying to remember the name, but anyway, we can send a follow-up on this. I know that we have information on our website about an invasive aquatic invertebrate. It's like a spiny fleabane or something along those lines. So
Yep.
we can send that information along too. And we do different invasive species webinars, usually end of February, beginning of March, for Invasive Species Awareness Week. So we can see if there's anything in those archived webinars and handouts that might be able to help you even to start identifying what you have in your water and whether it's something that belongs there and is part of the ecosystem, and that's great, or if it's something that you might want to be taking a bit more action on. So Chantal, I'll get you to go to your last slide, please. This is the end of today's presentation, and I think Chantal did not tell me this is going to be her last slide, but it's such a great way to showcase that individual actions are important and that they all come together to protect a water body, but also the watershed as a whole. And so if you, again, are interested in participating on your own property, if you're someone who has waterfront property and you're able to participate in the Natural program, I encourage you to reach out to Chantal. And if you are someone that values freshwater protection and nature-based solutions, another way that you can ensure that this type of program is happening is by making a donation to Watersheds Canada. Again, all new monthly donations are being matched today for Giving Tuesday. So this is double the amount of plants that Chantal and the Natural Edge team are able to put on properties into 2024. So if that is something that you are able to do, we greatly appreciate your support. One-time donations are also appreciated. If you're not in a position to make monthly donations, that's absolutely fine. It's all about all of us coming together collectively to take this action that we all value and protecting our freshwater areas into the future for both people and wildlife. So with that, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. As we've mentioned, we will be sending the recording, a number of resource links that Chantal has mentioned today, so you can access old webinars and all of those different guides she mentioned. And we'll also put Chantal's contact information there too. If you think of a question afterwards, you can follow up with her directly. But otherwise, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And we will potentially see some of you next week for our last webinar for 2023. Thanks so much.
Thank you.